So for the past 2 years, ever since I got hired with the SWCD, I was tasked with developing a monitoring plan for the Deer Creek, Muddy Creek, and Lower South Yamhill River strategic implementation area. And so we're just going to talk about that program and some of the early results that I've found so far. So first, what is an SIA? ODA started this about 10 years ago, and ODA is designated as a management agency for various federal mandates. And so part of this process was them developing something where they could interact with local constituents to address water quality concerns. So a big part of it is educating people about the local water quality program and regulations, offering incentive-based conservation programs, either through us, the SWCD, or the NRCS, or other stakeholders to engage landowners in doing conservation. A big part of it is monitoring to track those water quality trends and also developing these collaborative partnerships. And so in general, there's really two basic rules that are just important to keep in mind as a landowner. There's the stream-side vegetation rule. If you have a perennial stream, you need to allow vegetation to grow there to provide shade and stabilize banks and filter out pollutants. If it's a seasonal stream, you still need to stabilize the banks, and that could mean just a grassed buffer, basically. But when you have a perennial stream, it's important to have the shade to keep the temperature cooler in the water. And I just wanted to highlight one of these, highly eroding banks over here. We have a riparian plantings kind of up on the hillside here, and river systems are highly dynamic, and so it's not necessarily anybody's fault that stream-side vegetation would just start to erode, but it's definitely part of our goals and obligations as landowners to try to mitigate erosion where we can. And then the other rule is the waste rule. So basically, keep any type of waste out of the stream. This could be from livestock, but it also classifies soil as waste, and so that could be upland bare fields that are actively eroding and getting sediment into the waterways. So when you keep an eye on those two basic rules, you're going to be following the general area plan and rules for the Yamhill.
So when you say rules, is it an enforceable rule or?
They are, yeah. And so ODA, I think, has set up a great program where they don't just come at you straight with a violation and a fine. They'll say, okay, we've noticed that we think you might be out of compliance. Here's what we think you should do to get into compliance. And then you have a certain amount of time to get into compliance, potentially work with us or the Watershed Council to get into compliance. And then further down the line, if you've seen enough to get in compliance, then they'll issue violations. So for our strategic implementation area, this is before I started, but it was chosen that we should focus on all of Deer Creek, Muddy Creek, and the South Yamhill River. They're pretty different areas in terms of what's going on the ground there. So the green over here is the South Yamhill River, a lot flatter, hazelnuts, grassy, but also a lot of row crops as well. I feel like I noticed a lot of corn silage happening this year. And then as you move up in the system, the orange is Lower Deer Creek and switches a little bit more to just hazelnuts and grass seed. Muddy Creek has some of that going on as well, but Muddy Creek's probably a little bit more similar to the Upper Deer Creek, where there's forest activities and a little bit of livestock going on as well. So a lot of different diverse stakeholders to engage with here. And I also wanted to highlight, because we're at a Watershed Council meeting, what's in these systems. And so we've got native cutthroat that are throughout all of the streams here. When we're looking at this map, to start out, the red line is our winter steelhead. And so they tend to go all the way up into Deer Creek system. Same with the coho, which is the yellow line here. Pacific lamprey is just this purple line along the main stem, but that exists because there's very minimal data out there right now. But the Watershed Council has been doing some eDNA sampling over the past 5 or 4 years, and we're hoping to next year, if we get that grant, to actually sample multiple locations in Muddy Creek and Deer Creek and Dewey Creek, and a lot of these systems to figure out how far lamprey are going into the system. And later on, I'll actually show you a video of lamprey that we saw this year in the reefs, and I've heard from a couple of landowners as well that they
Average size.
the ones that we saw were only like 6 inches in size, but the ones that are at the Willamette Falls going up as adults are getting pretty big.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So are they in the creek year round or is it just a migration?
I think it's a migration thing. And Jacob, who's our ODFW fish bio, he can correct me on this, but yeah, I saw him in June as really small little guys. So. And then we do have a little bit of spring chinook that utilize the lower Yamhill, but I don't believe it's for spawning. I think it's just for rearing habitat. And then just highlighting what Jacob mentioned, there's a lot of coho over the falls this year.
There's also some, it's not listed there, but on Mill Creek, which is across from like Deer Creek, there's Pacific lamprey spawning up there. So I wouldn't put it past them for spawning up on Deer Creek too. Just again, like you said, there's a lack of information. So when we
Right.
need to delve a little bit deeper there to find out for sure whether or not they're actually using Deer Creek or not.
What time would the spawning be? That's right now, isn't it? They're moving up right now.
Each one
When they were spawning on
different
Mill
lamprey, yeah.
Creek, that was typically during our winter steelhead surveys in the springtime.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But-
So right now the coho are moving up the system, but the winter still had tend to do a little bit later in the season. So when I was given this project, when I was hired for the SWCD, I was kind of overwhelmed with what should we actually monitor. We didn't have a monitoring plan in place, and so I started looking at all the issues that the EPA has addressed and noted in our waterways. And so one of the biggest ones everybody kept talking about was this mercury total maximum daily load, and really the reason mercury is getting into our system is because of sediment getting into the waterways. So I thought that would be a really good thing to focus on because that is universal. Soil erosion is bad. So if we can mitigate that, we can mitigate mercury getting into the system, but also a lot of other issues as well. But EPA did note that there's phosphorus and temperature issues in Deer Creek. Dissolved oxygen levels can be very low in Muddy Creek and the South Yamhill River as well. And then in the past, there also has been E. coli noted in Lower Deer Creek and South Yamhill River. But what I decided to focus on was collecting sediment samples and also focusing on temperature in the waterways. The most recent temperature data was probably 10 or 15 years old, so I wanted to see where things were at now. So when I go out into the field, basic data I'm collecting alongside the sediment samples is with this handheld meter. So I collect temperature, pH, the conductivity of the water, and then TDS, which is total dissolved solids. And so that's kind of it's a different measurement than the total suspended solids is what I've been collecting water samples and analyzing those for. I'll go into that a little bit deeper as well. And so here's again a map of the whole area. It's probably kind of hard to see in multiple areas, but we've got a total of 12 different sampling sites now. The first year I had just 8, and then in 2024 the Watershed Council gave me another 4 or 5 temperature monitors to install, so we expanded where we're capturing temperature data. I thought it might just be useful to look at what the whole system looks like and where each of these monitoring sites are. So the first site is on an SWCD owned property called Gopher Valley Preserve. It's actually just downstream from Steve's place that he was mentioning. It is really a transition from forestry to agriculture. Last year, or end of November, I did note a couple of coho carcasses up there, so they are moving it up into the system, and I hope to see them in the next couple of weeks. For this year, back in 2020, the SWCD did a rapid bioassessment snorkel survey throughout this whole stretch and the neighboring landowners. So we have a pretty good idea of what's in the system, and we are hoping to utilize that survey to turn it into an in-stream habitat project at some point in the future. And out of all these sites, it did have the lowest sediment levels throughout the season. Our second site, it's where Grower Road hits Gopher Valley Road, the bridge crossing right there. And as you can see, the system's already changed a lot. It has, higher ag influence and just, it's a lot bigger system at this point, so higher sediment levels as well. This is a road crossing at Deer Creek Flats. What's always been fascinating about this system is how flashy it is. In the middle of summer, this thing's maybe 10 feet wide tops, and here it's overtopping its banks. As we're moving down in the system now, we've got more hazelnuts and grass seed influence. And what's also interesting about this site is the neighboring landowner allowed Public Works to do a roadside erosion control demonstration project along their roads. And so one thing we've been trying to partner with Public Works on is just doing more roadside erosion control projects. This fourth site is at Delashment Lane Road Crossing. So this is after Muddy Creek has hit Deer Creek. So again, it's a much larger system here. Here's our old coworker Keith in the stream here. This is at Muddy Creek at our Muddy Valley Habitat Reserve property. One of the district-owned properties. There's an active wetland enhancement project going on here. I think it's also important to know that it's very highly incised and it's a really flashy system. When we look at some flow data a little bit later on, you can see how fast the system becomes flooded and then drops back down. And then the photo on the left here is the new wetland enhancement project. So
And what time of the year was it?
I think it was about June. Yeah, and I actually saw probably 5 different lamprey over probably a mile of stream that year. So just pretty cool creatures.
Yeah, and this was the one we were looking at it and looking at the species of lamprey. We weren't sure if it was Pacific, right?
Pacific or brook. Yeah, we weren't quite sure. So
How big was it?
it was probably about 6 inches long, Jacob. Maybe.
Okay, I can already tell it's definitely not Pacific because it already has its eyes. And
Oh,
with Pacific, once they get to have their eyes, they aren't sticking around in the river system. They're already heading out to the ocean to feed on fish. So if it has eyes fully developed and it's that size, I can almost guarantee it's a brook lamprey.
so just 5 miles downstream, Muddy Creek hits Highway 18, and it's a very, very stagnant system here. It has the highest suspended sediment levels and the highest total dissolved sediment levels, and really small fluctuations in temperature. Then now we're moving on to the South Yamhill River, and I think these couple photos really show just how dynamic the system is. This is at the Bellevue Highway crossing. Most of the year it's like, the system down here, but at these really, really high flows, it's moving really fast. And then similarly, this is on the South Yamhill River, and it's opposite the landfill. And most of the season, I can get down to the creek where it's only about 50 feet wide. But at the high flows, the system's maybe 300 feet wide. This photo down here is kind of way, way down into the system there. So it's a really dynamic system. It's really, really interesting. And this is a Yamhill County Parks property. It's called Monroe Landing. It's closed to the public now, but I think there's been discussions that
Landfill side?
it's the old landfill site on the opposite side. So I think there has been discussions of opening it back up to the public at some point in the future. So now I just wanted to look at some of the data. So these 2 big spikes. So I guess first, we've got total suspended solids on the left here, and it's milligrams per liter. And so these 2 huge storm events, we were seeing certain levels much, or close to 100. And I know that maybe Grace can speak to this a little bit. I was trying to figure out exactly what levels are acceptable or not in terms of sediment getting into the river. And we're still trying to develop a relationship between suspended solids and mercury and things like that. But from what Grace shared a while back, in the mercury TMDL, they specifically say sampling for mercury is way more expensive. Let's try to just do total suspended solids. It's cheaper. We can develop a relationship between the 2. And so right now they were saying the maximum TSS they're hoping to find is 17. So obviously our system's getting much higher than at certain maximums. So really right now, we're just trying to create baseline data that hopefully we can improve upon as we move forward through time.
What's the sort of distribution of those sediments? You know, because obviously you're looking at the spike events, right?
Right.
So how, I mean, if you were to look at individually on those, the high percentage of the year tends to be down in the 40s, right? So does that vertical column there indicate the highest amount of total water flow in the system?
I believe so, yeah. And so I think I've got another graph where it kind of compares the flows
Yeah, I
at
guess
those points.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I want to say like the USGS gates at McMinnville here at the Yamhill, I think it was around 45 feet at these peak events, but down here it's probably like at 15 or 20 feet. So yeah.
So
Mhm.
6%.
Right.
How much of an impact do you think summer agricultural irrigation has on the stream?
It probably does have some impact. Yeah.
Monitor that?
Yeah, when I first started in 2022, that was, I believe, or was it 2023? I think it's 2023 was the lowest water year on record for the Yamhill River. And multiple farmers told me my irrigation water right got shut off. Like I got a letter from OWRD, and so it's hard to say if that's just due to climate or what, but we kind of see the different relationship than total to dissolved solids. And so basically when the system is actively flooding, that those dissolved solids kind of get flushed out of the system a little bit more. And then as the system gets more stagnant, we kind of see those total dissolved solids rise again. And these green dots, that one is the Muddy Creek at Highway 18. Like I mentioned, it's one of the most stagnant, and it makes sense that just a lot of dissolved solids are just going to sit and float in that system there. Here's those water level measurements. These were just taken, the lines aren't the actual data. I just wanted to show that for visual effect. So, but these points are the water levels that I would captured at each of the sampling events that I had. So this is the South Yamhill River up here, and then these data points down here are Deer Creek for the blue, and then orange is for Muddy Creek. And you can see they kind of coincide with the flows of the South Yamhill. So at both Deer Creek and Muddy Creek at the highest sites, I did install a water level logger that measures the water level at those two areas. And that was recommended because we don't have any data on systems that small. There wasn't any existing USGS gauges out there. So that's part of what we were doing. Some of the data here, you can see there's gaps, and we had some faults with the equipment. They were brand new Bluetooth technology, and some of the data wasn't coming through, or the batteries are failing. So last year the data wasn't ideal, but this year the data looks a lot better. And what I want to point out here for Muddy Creek is, in this flood event in Muddy Creek, the water level is at 1 foot, and in Deer Creek it's at 2 feet. And then within a day or two, Muddy Creek spikes like almost to 5.5 feet, whereas Deer Creek actually peaked out at 4 feet. And so part of that, maybe it's just much more highly incised there. There was higher storm events isolated into Muddy Creek versus Deer Creek. I'm not quite sure exactly what's going on, but it really, this data really showed to me like it's much flashier than Deer Creek. That was interesting to share. So we've got the water level loggers that are capturing water level every 30 minutes during the creek. And then when I get a chance, I go out there and actually measure the cubic feet per second as well. And so these photos here are showing Keith, our old coworker, in the creek and actually measuring the flow. And so you start to create this water level gauge and discharge relationship. And then over time, we wouldn't have to go collect discharge as often, and we can just use those water levels to estimate what the flow is. So that's kind of the vast majority of the sediment sampling I've been doing. And so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the temperature loggers. Here is our data logger here. We put it in one of these PVC pipes, and then I've been hammering it into the stream bed to stabilize it. And most of these temperature loggers are just staying through the summer season from about May through October. Just wanted to quickly highlight the other 4 sites that we've been doing sampling at. So Deer Creek Park is one of the Yamhill County Park properties. Unfortunately, this data logger failed. The O-ring burst for some reason, and so it got flooded, and we didn't get captured any data here. But if you haven't went to visit Deer Creek Park, it's a really nice property. There's multiple restoration activities going on there, beaver enhancement, and then there's also a wet dry prairie project as well, where there's Fander's blue butterfly and Kincaid lupin and many other wildflowers that exist there.
I saw a beaver at the new bridge last week.
They do. Another site I wanted to capture was Dupica Creek, so that's a tributary that goes into Deer Creek here, and I was able to get access to a property here, and the landowners there mentioned they've seen lamprey in the creek very frequently for the past couple of years at least.
So what are they feeding on?
Well, depending on species. So, when they're juveniles, both Pacific and Brook filter feed in the sediment. But then when they get to adults, so Pacific lamprey then become parasitic out at sea and feed on fish, while as Brook lamprey, they stop feeding altogether, and then they just focus on reproducing at that point.
The reason, you mentioned they're filter feeders, there's a lot of good sediment in Muddy Creek, so, and Dupica
Oh
Creek.
yeah, I could definitely see juveniles using that for sure. And depending on, do you happen to know if there's any type of possible spawning habitat in the upper reaches of Muddy Creek?
I think there definitely could be. It would be great to get you out there at some point in the future to
Yeah,
look
I'd
at
love
that.
to check out. And since it connects to Deer Creek, then there's a chance that there's coho in there too.
And then I wanted to start to capture maybe differences that are occurring like within our properties at Muddy Valley Habitat Reserve property there. And so this is kind of the most upstream access point that we have here. I think you can see it's pretty highly incised, and the substrate's mostly just very fine sediment here. This is where one of the lampreys was observed, and the temperature was much significantly lower at the start of the season than farther down the system. And then here's at the very bottom of our property here. And again, we saw lampreys this site. So here we've got temperature data from 2023. One thing that I noted was the red line, that is the Muddy Creek at Highway 18 site. And there's just very low fluctuation in the temperature, which kind of makes sense. It's more stagnant. Deer Creek had the highest fluctuations, and then our Muddy Valley Habitat Reserve property was kind of somewhere in the middle there. And then maybe Jacob, you could correct me again if I'm wrong here, but 18 degrees Celsius, is that kind of the cutoff that we're looking at for being a threatening to fish?
Yeah, I think that would be good. I mean, depending on the basin you go to, some species have developed higher tolerances for higher water temperatures in different basins, such as down here in the Klamath Basin and the Rogue Basin. But yeah, 18 degrees is usually right around there, which is around like 68, 70 degrees Fahrenheit is typically their usual tolerance. And if you get anything above that, then yeah, dissolved oxygen levels plummet and it just becomes too warm for them.
So that's what we were seeing in 2023. And then 2024, I broke the graphs into two separate graphs, one for Deer Creek. And so here, the temperature actually was a lot lower for the most of the season. I don't know if we just had a cooler cycle that year. And again, Deer Creek has, pretty high fluctuations, except, let's see, the red dot is Dupica Creek. And so I was surprised to see that there's really high fluctuations in Dupica Creek as well.
What's the upper temperature on that chart?
This one is 24 degrees.
So it's out of the range then, huh?
Yeah, and I want to, I want to correct myself, and I think they're looking at the 7-day daily average maximum. And so I didn't crunch the numbers that much. Basically, you know, if you're looking at the maximum peak of these points here, if it's over that 18 degrees for like 7 days in a row, that's when it starts to really stress them out. But you know, if you compare it to here, it got above 24, 2023. So, and then if you go, we go down to Muddy Creek, there's just less variation, and so not exactly why. So with high temperatures and high sediments, you know, I wanted to kind of shift gears slightly to talk about, you know, what different programs that are out there for the landowners to work with. So, one of the big ones would be the Conservation and Reserve Enhancement Program. Our coworker Rachel does that program, and it's a cost share program to help establish riparian buffers along streams. The SWCD and the Watershed Council provides a lot of technical assistance and free site visits. We have our native plant sale that's coming up. We also have a no-till drill that we rent out to landowners. And then because there's a lot of oak and prairie restoration going on in the Muddy Creek and Deer Creek, I also wanted to just mention that as well. And then I couldn't leave Thomas out with the NRCS. He also has a lot of different programs that landowners could be interested in. Rainwater storage tanks, irrigation efficiency upgrades. So, you know, going from that big gun to drip irrigation for hazelnuts, good conservation practice. And then also soil conservation practices. So, doing annual cover crops or maybe permanent cover, pollinator planting, fencing, and then doing wetland or pond establishment. So that's the presentation as a whole, and for the plans for 2025 and beyond. So I'm going to stop doing temperature and total suspended solid sampling at the end of August of next year. That's kind of the 2 or 3 full years of data collection there. If anybody's interested, there's always volunteer opportunities to do that with me. We're going to continue to provide technical assistance and develop projects with landowners. We are seeking some outreach events or field tours. So if there's any interested landowners that would like to have people on their properties to showcase what they've been doing, that would be great to hear about. And then hopefully in 2025 or 2026, in partnership with Grace and DEQ, we're going to start to analyze mercury and total suspended solids at the same time. And so trying to start to develop that relationship more acutely. And then for the longer term future, ODA is going to have a new program. They're going to shift away from the SIA, and they're going to start a new program called Focused Ag Solutions. It's a little bit it's similar to this program, but a lot more kind of watershed scale analysis and looking at the watershed as a whole. So most likely we'll continue to have Deer Creek and Muddy Creek get focused for the rest of the decade.